from Abuja.
Hello, thank you for being a part of our show. We appreciate you. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and this is Magnus Kpakol GVA, Global Views Africa. As you know, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, China's Belt and Road Initiative. What are the implications for Africa? Is it bringing another type of colonization? Can Africa have long-term fair trade and business in the Belt and Road Initiative? Today we examine some issues concerning how Xi Jinping, President of China, intends to connect the dots through Eurasia, Africa, and even the Americas. In particular, we want to see how it all affects Africa. But before that, in our hidden economics, we look at what I call PPP, that is, perceived political prostitution. Now, up next in our quick view, where around the world is China doing exceptional things? That's coming right up. Sometimes it is not as they used to say, we say wig. What you see is what you get. National powers sometimes build monuments that are not actually used for real economic benefits. During the Cold War, the United States and Russia stocked up armament, especially intercontinental ballistic missiles, which we hope they will never have to use. However, what do you say when the item looks desirable and costs so much money, and yet no one uses it, or it does not serve much in social benefits? In this connection, which of the following airports has been described as the world's emptiest international airport? Berbera International Airport, BBO, in Somalia. Cap Haitian International Airport in Haiti, otherwise just known as CAP. Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, or MRIA, in Sri Lanka. And Mayor Dayak International Airport in Niger, known by IATA as AJY. Which of the following African nations hosts China's first overseas military base? Angola, Djibouti, Kenya, or Somalia? Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, issues in China's Belt and Road Initiative through Africa. But up next in our hidden economics, perceived political prostitution, PPP. Mwa Baby by the great Nigerian singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and performer Chinedu Okoli, better known by his stage name Flavor Nabenia, or simply Flavor. With China's dramatic global ascendancy and power, is Africa switching from the United States or even Europe, home of its colonial masters, to China? If Africa is switching, Is the switch a flight for refuge? Or is it economic or even ideological? Today we look at and consider why politicians may seem to be switching parties, a situation that can be costly to voters in the time, energy, and money they spend choosing a candidate. So, as it seems, how can a politician switch from one party to another so easily? Folks, for this malady, it is not usually for votes. It is instead usually for political space. You may think that the politician is driven to switch because of greed or opportunity for personal gain, or even for refuge or protection. Folks, all these are the plausible and surface reasons that we observe. But they don't often explain what is really happening. What is happening is that the politician is not switching from ideology. In young democracies, political party ideology is not well defined, and the parties are not philosophically and ideologically differentiated. Take Nigeria as a test case. Even the best professor of political science would be hard-pressed to frame an ideological difference between the nation's two top political parties. Can you tell me what the real ideological differences are between the ruling APC and the main opposition PDP? Can you? Well, I didn't think so. So there is the problem. If there are no differences, then never blame a politician that crosses the carpet as often as he wants. Even so, believe me, I'm not completely politically naive. Lately, some politicians have seemingly switched, sadly, to take cover. But why shouldn't they? Why should any sun-wished politician suffer any trials if he can just switch his nominal party? After all, as we have said, there are no ideological boundaries between the parties. So, in reality, he is not switching. He is just repositioning himself. In which case, he's not a political prostitute, since he's really not jumping from one ideology to another. Don't worry, he's not even wasting your time, energy, or money. He never even did so, even in the first place when you first voted for him. If you want to catch a thief, create a law. If you want to catch political prostitution, create political ideologies. Then you can truly count your losses when switching actually takes place. Our hidden economics for you. Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, or MRIA, in Sri Lanka has been described as the world's emptiest international airport after China contributed nearly $200 million to build its first phase in 2009. Djibouti is the first international host to the Chinese Liberation Army, or Navy. So where is the Belt and Road of China? How does it affect Africa and the world? First, let us lean on CNBC and Jean-Ann Lee to learn what the Belt and Road Initiative actually is. So what is the Belt and Road Initiative? Some people just call it the BRI. Let's listen.
Called 一带一路 in Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative was first announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013. It's a globe-spanning plan with the purpose of strengthening trade, infrastructure, and investment links between China and an estimated 65 other countries. Together, potentially participating countries account for more than 30% of global GDP, 62% of the world's population, and 75% of known energy reserves. Despite what the name may imply, the road actually refers to a maritime network of shipping lanes running from China through Southeast Asia, Africa, and all the way to Europe. The belt, on the other hand, refers to the overland routes, stretching from Central Asia to Europe. The number of countries estimated to be in this initiative is between 60 and 115, while the amount of money committed is said to be between $1 trillion and $8 trillion. And then there's the question of who's coordinating this. It's definitely backed by President Xi.
But continuing with Jean-Ann Lee, we find the BRI may not be all that rosy a story after all. Here's a part of her report on some of the major hurdles that may be facing China in this project.
The Washington-based Center for Global Development raised serious concerns about 8 nations receiving Belt and Road financing. They include Pakistan, the Maldives, Mongolia, and even Djibouti, a country of less than 1 million, where China has its only overseas military base. The think tank said those nations mounting debts to China put their economies at risk of potential widespread defaults. China faced setbacks when some countries' leaders who had signed onto Belt and Road projects did not regain power. One example, Malaysia's new government, which moved to cancel a $20 billion rail project. And there's the Maldives, which opened a bridge with Chinese funds. Now, it wants to renegotiate its debt to China. Even when it looks like China has a winning hand, like when it took control of Sri Lanka's Hambantota port after the country couldn't make repayments, locals protested what they called a colonial invasion.
So, in terms of the pros and cons of the Belt and Road Initiative, here are some comments from a few experts, taken mostly from a debate organized by Intelligence Squared Debates in the United States. Intelligence Squared is a non-partisan, non-profit organization in the United States. The debate here is whether the Belt and Road is a $1 trillion blunder. Ian Bremmer, who is founder and president of Eurasia Group, takes the position that the Belt and Road Initiative is not really a $1 trillion blunder. He contends that only the United Nations General Assembly draws more heads of state than the BRI. The World Economic Forum, he contends, does not even come close. So that's mostly good for supporters of the BRI.
No, I don't think it's a $1 trillion blunder, and not just because they haven't actually spent that much yet. First of all, it's marketing genius. You know, you go to Davos and you see a few heads of state. You go to the Belt and Road Summit and you see more than anywhere in the world except at the United Nations General Assembly, and they're all there to do strategy at the convening of Beijing, who they want to write more checks. That's pretty extraordinary. You see that there are lots of countries in the world that are willing to do more Beijing's bidding politically because the Chinese are the only ones that are able to do long-term strategy and put cash behind it. So, for example, I was with I guess it was the Slovak Prime Minister the other day, who said that he spends more time with the Chinese Prime Minister in the regular East European 16+1 format of summitry than he spends with most of his neighboring countrymen in his positions. And he, as a consequence, is wanting to align his country much more economically with the Chinese. You're seeing how in Peru, they do about a third their business with the US, a third their trade with China, a third with Europe, but because it's the Chinese government, they're doing much more alignment with the Chinese as a whole. You put these things together and you see that it's an extraordinary, not just marketing plan, but a way for the Chinese to develop real political leverage around the world that otherwise they'd have a hard time picking up.
Now let's listen to Michel Flanow, who is co-founder and managing partner of WestExec and former U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. She thinks the BRI is generally good, but it has some adverse issues to look at. Let's listen to her.
I agree that the BRI will enable China to gain a strategic foothold and influence in key countries. What's not yet clear is how successful they'll be, because there has been some backlash generated in some countries. So let's start with the benefits. China has demonstrated that the model can work in places like Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Greece, and it believes that BRI brings them several benefits. First, new export markets, promotion of Chinese currency, tariff reductions, access to new trade routes, and most importantly, as Ian said, political influence. But there has been a backlash. A number of small, debt-ridden countries are now more concerned about the risks of signing up. They witnessed Sri Lanka, who was forced to give China a 99-year lease to a strategic port because they could not pay their debts to Beijing. And so other countries now fear a similar fate. You've seen Malaysia, Maldives, Sierra Leone, Myanmar, and others backing away from BRI projects or trying to demand refinancing. So it's definitely hit some bumpiness in the road. But the real problem is that the US and its allies do not have an answer. We don't have a counteroffer, a viable alternative. I think one of the places we could compete more effectively is in the digital Silk Road, in working with our allies to offer an alternative to some of these Chinese companies like Huawei that risk creating intelligence networks abroad for the Chinese as opposed to true telecom openness and transparency.
Thank you. Now, Yasheng Huang, who is a professor at MIT and also an author, argues that the Belt and Road project is based on a false premise. Let's listen to him.
The question is whether or not it is a $1 trillion blunder. So it is a finance question. All I heard from my other two previous speakers, they are talking about political payoff, right? So even though they say no, I don't think they answered the question. So the Belt and Road program is based on a false premise, which is that you need these massive investment projects to jumpstart economic growth. If that principle had been correct, the countries that today at the top of the economic pyramid will be countries such as Egypt rather than England. Egyptians were capable of building big projects. Asian Chinese were able to build big projects, the Great Wall, the Great Canal. The falsity with that idea is that, in fact, if you look at economic research closely, the infrastructures happen after economic growth. They are typically the result of economic growth. And this is the devil of doing social science, because very often in social science, actually all the time in social science, two things happen at the same time, and we don't know which one is the cause and which one is the effect. Correlation doesn't mean causation.
And so what does the Belt and Road Initiative really have for Africa? For my view, please stay with us. Don't go away. China's growing presence in Africa is one of the big stories of the day. And to concretize the story, we now have the extraordinary and revolutionary Belt and Road Project. And so around the world, pundits are guessing what China is up to in Africa, especially in light of the big initiative by President Xi Jinping. And Africans appear to be wondering what they should do with China and how they should understand and engage the BRI. Unfortunately, Africa has found itself in a corner, cowered by virulent poverty and not courageous enough to stand up and fight. And to tighten things practically full tilt, human capital deficiency is perversely causing even more brain drain, making matters worse in the attempt to find solutions in needed skills across board to engage a more industrialized and dynamic world. So now China has come with its might in skills and financial power. And you know what? Africa needs both skills and financial power. Africans used to think that they and China were in some sort of a South-South zone of economic and political cooperation. Is that really true when China's capacity to produce goods and services is stratospheric compared to Africa's? But now consider this. China sells finished goods of all types. Africa mostly sells natural resources of all types. So wait a minute, there's something here. The fear has always been that with no overlapping demand in trade, China, with its ability to churn out goods with ease, will always call the shots. But that's not true. Africa has what China needs, so there is good basis for equitable trade. I buy from you on your terms, what I don't have. You buy from me what you don't have, and on my terms. See? There it is, equitable trade. Now, the Belt and Road Project is in a way channeling the old Silk Road, where Romans used camel to get to China and back, sometimes taking 2 years because the lovely women of Rome liked silk, and only the Chinese really knew how to produce it. So now let's consider a belt and road where the belt essentially follows the old Silk Road on land. And the road now includes a maritime network of shipping lanes, some of which go through Africa. In this case, why have you come to Africa? It seems to me to get natural resources like crude oil, uranium, gold, and even diamond that lovely Chinese women want. So let's sit down along the Belt and Road and have a good discussion on how about 50% of the natural resources will be refined and processed in Africa. That shouldn't be too difficult a conversation. Let our leaders be of good courage. To make us buy into the Belt and Road, we must make it mutually beneficial. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.
Magnus.